Greetings. So I would like to share with you my reflections on well-being at this particular moment in history by touching on three things: looking outside, looking inside, and what I believe is the task before us to create a new and better world. My own sharing is inspired by a guru who said, "The one who looks outside dreams, and the one who looks inside awakens." And in a sense, this speaks to what have been my own essential movements in my well-being journey and the key transitions in my well-being journey as a social justice activist and a leader in the African philanthropy space. And I must preface it by saying my appearance here today in front of this eminent global audience of social change leaders sits squarely in the realm of the improbable when I look at it from all accounts. Because when I completed the form to affiliate to the Wellbeing Program a couple of years ago, in hindsight, when I look back, my application was a very eloquent, self-written dismissal and disqualification of my candidates for the Wellbeing Program, because it was 100% about looking outside. Some very good friends who were with the media network then had reached out to me. I don't know what they had seen, but they were very insistent and very encouraging. Please apply, please apply, please apply this program. And of course I did. But what came out was 100% about the outside world and close to nothing about Briggs and who I was as a social change leader, as an activist, and what I was engaging in. And I remember the initial feedback that I got was that it went something like, "Oh, so this is actually not for you, at least not now, because you're okay, you're all right, you're 100% fine." And what made me pay attention is that it was so close to what I remember had been Donald Trump's report to the American public on his state of health. You remember that time when he said, "I have the most perfect, up-to-date, excellent, most wonderful health status north of the equator." And he actually said something like, "My doctor has told me that my bones are like those of a 26 or 28-year-old. Google it, I'm not lying, you will find it." So of course, it made me pause for a little bit. So he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens. I think the looking outside part is very important given where we are today. I believe looking outside is about the context. It's about the times that we are living in. It's about observing and sensing into the outer. I believe it's about looking at the clock of history and being able to tell what time it is and being able to understand the demands of the time. My sense is that as a generation, we are called upon in a much more earnest manner than at any other time to lift our gaze, look around ourselves, look at what's happening, observe the outer, and understand what is our historical task at this particular moment. And I believe that if we were to look around carefully, developments around the world will tell us that we are at a particularly critical point of transition in world history. Usually, I would quote activists, or I would say something myself, but I know we have lost our credibility a little bit because almost every year, when we write as social change leaders and activists, when we write our perspective, we always use the language, this is the decisive moment. I remember doing it myself at some point. Then the following year, I had to write, this is the most decisive moment. And after that, supremely decisive. Then you start to run out of adjectives. So let me call in the voices of world leaders from the just ended World Economic Forum in Davos and some of the recent statements that we have been hearing. And I will tell you, if you have not seen it, that the summary of the World Economic Forum discussions went out packaged as history at a turning point. That's what they put it out as. And John Kerry, who was at the World Economic Forum, he spoke of, we are on a precipice. One of the leaders there spoke of the crisis in the world, inducing a sense of a new kind of world that we want to create. Joe Biden has been talking about the world stands at an inflection point in history. And he has gone further to talk about we are in the midst of a fundamental debate and fight about the future and direction of our world. Henry Kissinger, at 99, is talking about a new era. He's the one who wrote the book titled The World Order and really broke it down to nuts and bolts, conceptually, what that means. The talk of a new world order is no longer a talk for conspiracy theorists. This is now mainstream talk by the most prominent leaders. The leaders of the biggest powers in the world are talking about a new world order, whether it's the US, it's China, it's Russia, it's India, it's the Philippines, it's Mexico, all the big economies, all the big world powers, present and emerging, are all talking about a new world order. And I think it's a reason for us to pause and really figure out what that means. And I think one of the things that emerged for me from Davos is that the debate about whether it's a matter of building back, of building forward, is settled. The chairman and CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, again as part of the World Economic Forum conversation, spoke of none of us are coming out of the pandemic assuming we are going to go back to 2019. We have to find a new way going forward. So the task is about building forward better, or building better forward. Just look at what's happening. The technological disruptions, unprecedented. The tectonic shifts in geopolitics, unprecedented. The threats for repeated disasters, the pandemic that we experienced with COVID, and the risk for new pandemics, the threats for famine, the fragmentation we are seeing around even the nature of the state and the consolidation of the state itself, even in countries that thought they were beyond history. Remember Fukuyama talking about the end of history. Just look at what is happening. I think if we're to look at it very, very carefully, it will not be an exaggeration to say that the very social, economic, and political foundations of what has been our world for the last several decades are in peril. And the task to build a new and better world beckons. And that's what brings me to the conversation around looking inside. Because for me, the question is, if we are seeing this fragmentation and this point of collapse to the outer, what has everything that has led to our world coming to this particular stage where we are now talking of a climate emergence, where it's no longer a theoretical question if we are discussing the possibility of nuclear war in the world. What is the processes that has taken us to that point done to us inside? And what I have learned as an activist coming from Zimbabwe, my own native country, is that protracted, unresolved crises fester like a wound into a breakdown of the very social fabric of a society. So it's beyond a political crisis, it's beyond an economic crisis, it's now a social crisis. And in my estimation, that is the deepest depth of any crisis that you can think of. Because you are talking of a breakdown in social cohesion, a breakdown in trust, you are talking of polarization, you are talking of division, you are talking of all the things that describe where we are in terms of, the stage, at the global stage. We are also talking of the breakdown in solidarity, and without that, even well-designed institutions cannot deliver. I think I also heard Madam Ngozi at the World Economic Forum making the very same point. The institutions are there, but the sense of global solidarity that enabled multilateralism, collaboration, cooperation, and everything is gone. So these institutions are just shells. They cannot deliver. That's why we couldn't attend to COVID-19. That's why we can't manage a global economic crisis. That's why we are failing to address some of these questions. I've also learned that deep-seated and unresolved injustices in my own context, going all the way back to the colonial era, create trauma that persists across generations, resulting in wounded leadership, something that we are not very comfortable to talk about. And it's wounded leadership even among activists and social change leaders like ourselves. And I've learned that this woundedness creates a vortex that turns victims into perpetrators, and that sometimes even turns activists and emerging leaders into perpetrators, and limits our ability as humanity to create a better world and create this vicious loop where we never seem to be able to reach where we want to go. So as we are looking inside, I believe we have a huge task at this particular moment to look at how do we lead from a different place to a different destination. Otto Sharma says our efforts to deal with the challenges of our time often fail because we are blind to the deeper dimensions of leadership and transformational change. For me, the well-being process has been my own personal movement towards what he called the source dimensions from which effective leadership and social action come into being. There is so much we are not tapping into by just looking outside and staying in our brains. I believe that the task before us today is to help define our next chapter as humanity. And that requires that we appreciate what Bill O'Reilly called and spoke of when he said the success of interventions depends on the interior condition of the intervener. The well-being process for me has taught that we do better as social change leaders if we can tap into our wholeness as human beings and draw from dimensions beyond the limits of our intellect. Some of the questions we are struggling with today were already solved by our ancestors. They knew, for example, how to pass on the world to the next generation, something that we are now very doubtful about. At that very minimum level, they were able to do it. That's why we are here. But right now, we face a climate peril, we face a nuclear war possibility that can completely destroy this world. So part of it is how do we even establish just that ancestral reconnection so that we can remember and we can reconnect to what we have always known. And we can tap into those mysterious sources of our intelligence, where the magic about the sustainability of us as humanity arises from. That's a big issue that we must face up with. Let me close by saying something about creating a better world. I believe that we are the generation that history has tasked with the weighty responsibility to reimagine and build a new and better world. And if I am to say anything today, it is that our historical mission or historical task as a generation is to center well-being in that endeavor. I think Aaron said it at the very beginning that this conversation has been a very marginal conversation. It's emerging and moving itself to the center. But we can all accept that this has been a conversation right at the margins of the discourse about development, about people who want to move society forward. It has always been about political economy analysis, the material conditions, the concrete reality. That's what our discourse is about. That's what we have been experts at. And I think given this question before us of imagining and contributing to defining and building a better world, our task is to begin to center this conversation in that process. It means for institutions like ourselves, the Trust Africa, we're working across the continent with social movements, with activists, with other partners. It's really about starting with our institutions. How can well-being begin to occupy the center? With the movements that we support, especially social movements that we are seeing emerging across the continent, young people driven, really committed to a different world, a more just society. How can we support those movements by ensuring that well-being becomes a key part of it? When I confessed earlier to my own outside orientation, that's what you find in the majority of the social activists on the continent, across the globe, who are working for change. They are looking outside. They are not looking inside. So how can we facilitate a movement that begins to look inside as a really huge task? It can no longer be a conversation on the margins. We need a well-being movement. I don't know if that language is appropriate. And I believe that in the task, this is the last thing I'll say, in the task to create a better world at this time, we are being called to look inside, heal our broken selves, and once again reach for that which has made us better, that which has enabled us to do better, and that which gives us the possibility to create a better world for all. And that is humanity, solidarity, community, compassion, love, mystery, soul, spirit, kindness, relationship, connection, healthy relationship with self, the other, and the world around us. Thank you.